Good evening and welcome to Choosing Love in a Time of Fear, a Facebook Live event on COVID-19. My name is Daniel Gilman. I'm an apologist and speaker with RZIM. We're a global organization exploring key questions of life and faith and culture from a Christian perspective. Wherever you're tuning in from around the world, we want to say welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our hearts and our prayers go out to everyone who is sick right now, especially everyone who's been impacted this all around the world, and we're so grateful for you tuning in. Amidst the rising number of people who've been infected with COVID-19, there seems to be a growing sense of angst and fear. It seems like the world has changed overnight. Here in North America, schools are closed, churches have largely gone online. Many people are working from home. If at all, we know some of you are, your jobs are on pause right now, and the world just seems so different. We think especially of those in countries like Italy and Iran, China and South Korea, where they have felt the pain from all of this so intensely. As the world has changed so much, I think of the words of the late apologist and speaker, author, Francis Schaeffer, who asked the question, how should we then live? I think that in order to be able to answer that in a meaningful way, we first need to ask the question, how should we first think? And so to help us with that question tonight, we're going to be doing this Facebook Live interview. We want to be very clear tonight that we're not here to invalidate anybody's fear. We're not here to give trite answers to real tough questions. We're not here to say, just let's replace fear with love, something so shallow as a trite answer like that. But what we are here tonight is to look at this in a genuine way and say, amidst the suffering, amidst the pain, amidst the fear, and even the panic, how can we choose love? How can we find hope? And how can we explore this from a perspective looking at ancient wisdom? And we're going to be looking at some insights that we have from the Christian God revealed to us in the person of Jesus. To help us with that is a special guest, a friend of mine, Nathan Betts. And Nathan, I want to say welcome. He hails all the way from Seattle, Washington.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, so everyone again who's joined from all around the world, we're so grateful that you're here. The evening is going to go like this. I'm going to interview Nathan for a few minutes. We're going to have some sweet questions, some really tough questions for him, and then we're going to open up to you. We're going to accept your questions from all around the world and do our best to answer as many of them as possible. So please, even now, type in your questions in the comments section. We're also going to be providing some very helpful links there, so please be there. Also, let us know as you ask your question where you're tuning in from. That'd be really helpful. And that'll be the evening. I'll interview Nathan, and then we'll take your questions. I'm going to just introduce Nathan now more fully. Nathan was born in St. Catharines, Canada. He was raised here as well. And then he went to school here in Toronto and graduated with a BA from Tyndale University. He then has a master's from King's College University, London. And then he's also a graduate from the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. He heads up RZIM North America's youth initiative, and he recently spoke at both Facebook and Microsoft headquarters in Seattle. So he's done so much and inspires me so much. He's recently written an article on the very topic of how to choose love in a time of fear. I'm so excited to have him here tonight. He lives in Seattle, Washington with his wife Brittany and their 4 children. Nathan, welcome.
Yeah, thanks again, Daniel. It's an honor to be just included in this conversation.
Well, Nathan, I so appreciate the article that you wrote. It's actually what inspired us to do tonight, so we're so grateful. You address the topic with such sensitivity as well as such seriousness. I love that you take it seriously, but you're not scared. And so I want to just start off by reading a little quote from what you wrote. This is your words, and then we'll ask you some questions about it and get into the topic. So here we go. You wrote, as I drove home from work yesterday, I began thinking about what it looked like to live out of love instead of fear in this moment. Fear tells me that I should ensure I'm safe and that my family is safe from contacting the virus. Just take care of yourself, says fear. Fear asks the question, how do I get out of here? But love asks, how can I be a light in this situation? Nathan, can you walk us through what was going through your mind as you were driving home and what motivated you to share your thoughts with the whole world?
Yes, I think that really I remember that day. It was a couple of weeks ago, and it's, as we all know now, I think globally, just how fast things can change, not only day by day, but hour by hour in terms of what kind of laws are put in place, in terms of how the spread of coronavirus is happening. So a lot has changed even from 2 weeks ago. But 2 weeks ago, I remember being in the office building where I work here in the South Puget Sound area of Washington State. And I remember talking to friends there, and they said, "What do you think of what's going on?" And they were talking about this virus. And I said, "Look, I know as much as you do." And we were just talking about the different things that were happening in Washington State. And there was a sense of fear. No one said that, but we all felt it. And shortly after that conversation, I had a conference call with a friend who's in the tech sector here in Seattle. And I'm currently giving a talk series to a group there. And on this phone call, she was saying to me that everyone from that organization were mandated to work from home. This was 2 weeks ago. For the most part, that's happened to most, if not all, of the companies in the Seattle area here now. But I sensed on that phone call fear. And after I got off that phone call, I wondered, why am I feeling this way? This can't be the way that I think, feel, and act as a person who is following Christ. There has to be a different way. And I remember driving home from the office that day thinking, love has to be the way. That is what we see historically demonstrated for us through people who followed Christ. We see that especially, as I mentioned in my article, in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, where many were enduring plagues, seeing the embodiment of people who were following Christ and what kind of sacrifice and service they gave in the name of Christ. And it was really that love, not fear, that distinguished the early church from the pagan communities in that moment. And so I started thinking about myself and thinking, how can I do that? How can I live from love and not from fear? And that started to just ripple into this article that I synthesized.
Well, thanks so much, Nathan. Yeah, there's so much from history that we can learn from this time. I really, really appreciated the way that you drew on the first couple of centuries of Christianity, looking at the ways that Christians responded to pandemics in their time. And so, yeah, is there anything more that you can share with us that you learned as you looked back and saw how Christians reacted in those times, how they were able to take this seriously and be responsible, not trying to spread anything, but at the same time choose to be loving?
Yes, I think really what I gleaned from that, as I looked, I cited the book by Rodney Stark, who is a sociologist. He's a professor, I believe still at Baylor in Texas. And what's interesting about him is he was writing that book, and the book is called The Rise of Christianity. And as he started the book, he was not a Christian. He was actually just doing intellectual academic work on how this small sect, this small group of people all of a sudden turned into this world-changing revolutionary movement. And as he chronicled all this data, all these stories, he was convinced. And in the process of doing this academic work and putting his book together, he became a follower of Christ. Quite a dramatic story. But I remember actually reading the 4th chapter in that book, which focuses on the epidemics in the Roman Empire. And I was just challenged. I think I'd use the word challenged, because as I started thinking about love in this current moment, which is very complex given what we know now about how the virus spreads and what we know about social distancing and the importance of that, and being considerate of others looks different than what we might actually intuitively think. I started to think to myself, hold on, if we try to love people, that can be easily confused with being reckless and very costly. And I think there is a difference here in that love does cost, but that does not necessarily mean that love is reckless. What we see in the early church, what I was looking at when I looked at the 2nd century church, 3rd century church in that Roman Empire, I saw something that was not reckless, but actually something that was just simply embodying the love of Christ, that for some cost their lives. But it was a love for Jesus, seeing him, one who actually gave up his life so that others might live, the people who followed Christ. were following in his footsteps. And that challenged me. Particularly, it challenged me in my understanding, if to be very honest here, it challenged me at the understanding of Christianity being this soft and milky, everything will be fine if you just believe and follow Jesus. That's actually simply not historically nor grounded in the teachings of Jesus and what we see in the Bible. There's a clear disconnect that actually, if you sign up, so to speak, if we follow Jesus Christ, God in flesh, real person, first century Palestine, there's a cost. And I think for us in the Western Hemisphere, that challenges us because I think we have been lulled into this belief that actually if you follow Jesus, everything will be okay. At an existential, at a mental, at a materialistic, whatever kind of level, everything will be fine. And actually, Jesus never said that. He actually said there will be trouble. He said, look, if you follow me in this world, there will be trouble. There will be tribulation. There will be difficulty. But he didn't stop there. He said, but I have overcome the world. Yeah. So even in that, he's saying there will be difficulty. Yes, there will be things that will cause fear. But actually, the love that I am embodying, that actually wins in the end.
Nathan, I love the quote you share with us from Jesus, where he's talking about both that twin reality, that in this world we will have difficulty, and that he doesn't just pander over that or act as if that's not true or call us to be blind to it. He's very honest. We will have difficulty, but like you said, he then went on to say in that very same sentence, but that we can find comfort, that we can take heart, because he's actually overcome all of this. And so there's that twin reality of being very honest and very real about the pain, and also that we can find hope. I know that it's easy as we're talking about this to stay in the language of abstract as we're talking about love and fear, but I like to just go a little more practical now. And I really love how in your article, and I think we're going to share it below so that everyone can have a chance to read it, but in your article you share some real practical steps of what it actually means to love, what it means to help other people in a time where coming into contact with people can actually pass on the virus. And so can you give us some practical ideas that you've kind of worked out yourself on how we're able to show love in this time?
Yeah, I think, well, one, I would just certainly give full disclosure and a disclaimer saying, I certainly, I only know so much. I'm, sort of an obvious point. So I'm just going to be able to give a start here. There are many wiser and more knowledgeable people on this subject. But what I've gleaned, just being sort of here in Washington State and slowly seeing life in a big way as we know it around here, shops, restaurants, libraries, everything you see on the main streets close, and knowing what we know, again, as I just mentioned about the term social distancing and keeping 6 feet apart, and even the group law now in the U.S. That President Trump has put of no more than 10 people getting together. I think the challenge is expressing care and love in a human way that actually is still embodied love, as opposed to just simply virtual care. Now, virtual care isn't necessarily bad, but I think we still need to somehow cultivate the practices of so I think one way there is by maybe giving someone a phone call. I put that in one of the steps. Giving someone a phone call. We use so often now, we use our phones for everything but making a phone call. But maybe by giving a person a phone call, a person who might be in self-isolation or quarantine, the power and beauty of actually hearing someone's voice when we are isolated is so profoundly meaningful. So I think by giving someone a phone call can be especially meaningful in this moment. I think depending on where we are, again, so much of these answers are contextualized. But for me, as it stands in my neighborhood, I can go, and since I know people in my neighborhood, I can go to a person who is elderly. I can knock on their door and simply saying, look, I know how you're doing. I know your health is a bit precarious right now. Can I help you? Can I get groceries for you? That is something right now. Of course, this is a neighborhood. It's a city. It could be a regional specific thing, because this might even, as we move along here, that might be something that our leaders at a local level caution us against. But at the moment, still practicing that social distancing, we can offer help in that way. I think in other, so again, these are all very physical. These are still very human ways of expressing care by a telephone call, maybe a video chat, knowing our neighbors and asking those who are vulnerable or elderly how we can care for them. I think another way in which we can demonstrate Christ's love is by simply asking our neighbors. And this actually, for many of us, this will require courage. But talking to our neighbors and saying, look, how can I pray for you? And praying for them there. For many of us, that's a massive step. So I think those are a few ways in which we can express care. I think one other way, before I pass it back to you, because I think there are many possibilities here, but one could be thinking of people in public service, our policemen, firemen, people at the hospital. If we know people, medical practitioners, making a phone call and saying, look, can I, even right now, as it stands, again, things are changing, but right now in our area, you can still get coffees. You can still get Starbucks or a coffee shop or drive-through. Say, look, can we buy a few of you guys coffees? That could be one way in which we serve them and let them know, hey, we're thinking of you. We are grateful for what you're doing. People who are on the front lines. We can also express that care by saying, hey, how can I pray for you? But I think knowing those people, our leaders, saying, hey, there's a way in which I can express generosity, hospitality. Can I buy you a sandwich? At this point, we can still do that. Again, right now, drive-through services are still open. Restaurants, at least in my city here, it has closed down, but the drive-through capacity is still open. So again, everything's moving so fast, but we have to be creative. But I would encourage us to still think in very distinctly human terms, as opposed to just going completely virtual. How can we cultivate who we are, who we want to become, and ultimately by doing that, those practices shape us into who actually we want to be. People who are hospitable, generous, embodying the love that again points us back to the love of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. You touched on such helpful things, and one of the things that's been really challenging for me, neither Nathan or I are medical doctors, and so we're trying to be careful tonight not to give any medical advice. One of the ways that my wife and I have been trying to think through how we can love people well is also to be aware of the health risks we might pose others. As Nathan and I are both public speakers, and so our job leading up to very recently when so much has been canceled has been to meet people and to travel a ton. And so as an extrovert, I just so badly want to go and be bringing coffees and food to elderly people around me. I want to go say hi to them face to face. But we've had to also recognize, as someone who's been traveling and interacting with people a ton, just last Wednesday we hosted a really special event in the office, and I realized I had shaken probably 75 different people's hands. And Wednesday from last week to Thursday of last week, the world seemed to change so much when all of a sudden so many things got canceled, and all of a sudden we're starting to very seriously, I know other parts of the world have already been seriously having to work through this, but here in Toronto it just seemed like everything changed, and we started to seriously think through what is the impact of shaking one person's hand and then the next person's hand. The very people we want to help the most, those who are elderly, those who might be vulnerable, are the very people who I might, if I am a carrier, might impact. And so how can we love people well? I've been so grateful for Amazon Prime because, again, me bringing groceries to someone's house may not be helpful, but I can at least send someone a small package. We got to think through these very practical questions. Nathan, with you and I not being medical doctors, there's so much online, there's so much on TV about ideas and thoughts and advice. So how have you tried to maturely distinguish between fact and fiction, what is rumor and what is actually responsible information? How have you dealt with this?
Yes, I think speaking personally, I found just over this past weekend, I found myself becoming anxious, and I had to think, why am I feeling like that? And I realized that I had, in a big way, been watching the news so much, and so much of that is, for me at this point, at least my experience of the news was coming away with just so much uncertainty. And I think there is certainly right now a felt sense of fear that stems from that, the unknown. So what I would say before I, say a few recommendations of how we might be able to learn from the people telling us what's going on, real time, and the details, how the data is developing. I think my encouragement from a personal standpoint would be to say, to be aware and be vigilant about not only what, but how much time we are spending with the news. And here's why. A basic principle, a fundamental principle to us as human beings is that the things we do, the practices that we involve ourselves in, what we watch has formative power. Those things are not static. So there's a sense in which the news has an emotional effect on us, a visceral. It comes to us at a visceral level, and if we're not careful, it can shape us at that affective, at that emotional level. And that's what I found when I was watching the news. That I came away actually feeling very anxious by it. So what I would say is, not only, with that being said, I'm not saying it's bad to watch the news. What I'm saying is, one, we not only need to be concerned with what kind of news we're watching, but also monitor and be aware of how much we are watching, and make sure that, as again, from a Christian perspective, there's a greater narrative that goes against fear, and that narrative comes from the story of a God who loves us, who actually is in control of the situation, that even though things might seem like they're just completely unraveling, he's actually still in control. He is in control of the situation. So I think to not only make sure, one, what we're watching, but how much time we're spending on, those are important things, but also to make sure that we are taking time to listen to God by prayer, by listening to him, being quiet, engaging in the scriptures, his words to us through the Holy Scriptures. Enormously important. Those practices, again, have formative power. Now, when it comes to the news, I would say there are different places that I would say I found to be helpful. One is the CDC, so the Center for Disease Control. That website, I think, can be helpful, and that has also regional specific information to know, state by state, province by province, depending on where you are throughout the world. Up-to-date information. I would also say, I think the World Health Organization, the website there, those two are very helpful. There are different news sites, but those are sites where I feel, in terms of just the scientific, the medical piece, I think, and also making that information accessible for people who don't necessarily know the technical terms, I've found those to be helpful. But I think it's also a question of how, again, coming full circle, how we process the news. It's very important to remember not only what, but also how much time we're spending watching the news, and make sure we're cognizant of what narrative is actually informing my life. If it is fear, then we have to ask the question, why? And for me, I actually realized that it was actually too much of an immersion in the news, and I actually had to pull back and say, hold on, what narrative should be driving my life? And it's not that. It's actually a greater narrative, a more beautiful and true narrative that comes from the scriptures that reflect the God of history, the God who actually has intervened. He's come to us in real time and to show us who he is, that he actually is in control, and fear does not have the last say.
Nathan, thank you so much. That's so good. As you were speaking, you reminded me of a book I read recently by Professor James K. Smith. The book is called You Are What You Love, and he suggests that what we're doing does something to us. And so when you said about how you're watching the news, but what is the news doing to you? I think that with a lot of people practicing social distancing, hopefully we're all practicing social distancing responsibly, we're getting to have more time to do different things than we normally do. And so I want to challenge all of us. I've been chatting this through with my wife and with my brother Josh, trying to figure out what are the things we're doing? What is that doing to us? I think it'd be really tempting, as we have maybe a little more free time these days, to just veg out watching Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever streaming service people subscribe to. But we need to be very intentional with kind of added gift of free time these days. As I don't know if I want to call it a gift, because I know it's like in such a difficult context, but it is actually a gift to have a little more time. If people aren't commuting to work, we have a little more time here at home. And so if we use our time really well, we're going to be able to emerge from this time of such brokenness, either having vegged out or actually having kind of improved our knowledge and our wisdom and our hearts of love. And so Nathan, have you thought through what are some of the things you're trying to do as you're now, I'm assuming you're now working from home, so what are some of the routines or the practices that you're getting to spend a little more time doing right now?
I think it's a great question. I think what I've found is, for myself, more than ever, the importance of having that time in the morning before I do anything. Having that time that is quiet, dedicated to just being quiet before God. Fundamental to Christian belief is the understanding that God speaks, God acts. And if ever there were a moment in which we need to take that seriously, it's now. So a pretty good test is right now for us, and I would say for myself, is when I get up in the morning, what do I trust? And who do I trust? And I found that not only the issue of trust is something that is important, but I've also found by coming to God, I'm also saying I need him. And that actually what he says is way more, it's vastly more important than actually whatever else. And right now, it's the news, because I'm very interested on a day-to-day basis to know, hey, what's the update? What's going on? And really right now, what's the new law? What's the new stipulation that's put in place? And again, it's making a concerted effort, being intentional in saying what narrative is going to drive my life. What's the compass that is going to guide me today? And for me, I think that's the habit that I've been cultivating, but more intentional than ever. In the morning, before I look at the news, before anything, making that time specifically dedicated to listening to God, being quiet, reading the scriptures, and right now I also daily I go for a walk just to be quiet, no headphones, no screen, just going to be quiet and talking to the Lord. I think that's a key practice. It's also with my friends, a lot more is by telephone right now, and I'm video conferencing. But I think those are the two things that come to mind. I think, and even when it comes to news and social media, being very specific in knowing when I'm turning to the news, as opposed to just like, at the click of a button, knowing, okay, when I'm going on the news, it's actually with intent, not just sort of casually looking at the news or going onto social media, but very intentionally knowing when I'm doing it and how long I'm going to spend on that. So I think, one practice that my friend who's a pastor in California mentioned to me that I think is quite helpful is whenever we are watching the news, right now, as it pertains to COVID-19, always making a point of praying for whatever we see on the news after we read or watch the news. So whatever we might be reading and what's happening in China, in Europe, whatever part of the globe, here in North America, not letting that news being broadcasted have the last say, but actually at the end saying, God, I commit this to you.
Nathan,
I entrust it to you.
Yeah, Nathan, thank you. That's so good. And you've mentioned the impact the news has on us a lot. Something that I've challenged myself with recently is not just to go to the news, but to go to the old. I've been cracking open some really good old books. Just today, I started reading through Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. And it's so helpful how some of these really old books, I know some of you watching this, if Cam McAllister is watching right now, he's like, that's not an old book? I can tell you about old books. But no, for me, that's an old book. I spent a lot of time in the news. And there's such insightful, helpful, comforting, such relatable insights from these old books. Just finished Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained by John Milton. Again, I've been so refreshed, even in this really painful time, to be able to crack open some really old books. And so I'd love to encourage people to do that as well, to be able to, for sure, please stay engaged with the news, but definitely, see if you can find some jewels in the old books. So yeah, I want to recommend that. Nathan, you've mentioned a couple times the comfort you find in God, and not just the comfort, but how we can actually make a difference in prayer. I know that at times like this, it can be can awaken some really tough questions, both for people who don't have a faith background, who don't attend church, as well as those who do, even those who are really faithful. And so I'm going to switch in a moment to ask you just some maybe one real tough question about God and suffering. But before I do that, I want to invite everyone again who's just tuning in, please ask questions in the comments below. Let us know where you're asking from, what city or country you're in, and please engage with us, because pretty soon we're going to wrap up me interviewing Nathan and let it open to you. But we really need questions in order to be able to do that. So please ask your questions, whether it's about COVID-19 or even if you have questions about Nathan as a writer and a speaker. There's so many more questions that I would love to ask him, but I don't want to be selfish, so we'll turn over to that. But to get back to the more philosophical faith questions, one basic way of saying this would just be, if God, why COVID-19? The question of, I know some have asked, those who are asking from more of a faith perspective, questions like, is this because of God's wrath and global judgment? Others are asking more of a philosophical question, an apologetic question. How could there really be a good and all-powerful God if bad things like this happen that are so personal as our friends and family, even ourselves, getting sick? So Nathan, how would you answer that question? If God is good, why COVID-19?
Yeah, no, thank you, Daniel. I think the first point I'd make in just starting out this conversation is, one, it's a very long. This requires a long conversation, but for sake of time, let me just provide a start to that question. First, even when that question is asked, we know that it carries with it emotional weight. It's not merely intellectual. The question is complex because it comes to us at two different levels. One, certainly intellectual. We want to know answers that touch on the intellectual surface, but also we're asking personally. And depending on where we are, those of us, we're experiencing emotional pain, but at different levels. So it's very complex. I think just another point I'd like to make before I say something of what the Christian perspective has to offer here, and it's this. The question is not a Christian question, because I think sometimes when the question is posed, it immediately conjures up this idea of like, yes, what does Christianity have to say? And Christianity does have something profoundly beautiful, hopeful, and good to say to this question, but it's a fallacy, it's a mistake to think that this is just how does Christianity answer this question? Because actually I'd like to say it's a human being question. We all ask this question. So the real issue here is, just to sort of put it out here as a preliminary point, the question is not what does Christianity have to say necessarily, although it has something hugely meaningful to say. The issue is all systems of belief, all religions, all faiths have to ante up here, so to speak. The question, the issue is, what system of belief best makes sense of this question? That's the issue. Now, when we come to Christianity, Christianity tells a story from the beginning of Scripture. Genesis, the first book of the Bible, tells us of God creating the heavens and the earth. He creates this cosmos, and all of creation is good. And then only in the third chapter, it's not too long into the book of Genesis, where we see sin. We come to that word, which for many of us, we don't like using the word, but it's reality that we know. We might not use the word, but we actually we know that reality of brokenness. There's a fracturing, there's a disorder, not only outside in the natural order in the physical world, but a disorder there's fracturing in the human heart. Christianity helps us make sense of this because it doesn't ask or suggest or endorse us to suppress. It doesn't encourage us to suppress the reality of evil or sin, this brokenness in the world. It actually opens our eyes to it and reminds us that that is a reality. There is this disorder, not only outside, but also inside. So that is helpful because not all religions will grant us that reality, that there is evil. Evil is real. But also, when we look to Christianity, Christianity tells us that evil is real, but also evil is wrong. There's a sense, even when we think of COVID-19, that this is wrong. This does not seem right. Christianity actually validates that and says, yes, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing right now, when you look around at the news, when you see what you see in your community, that is real. But Christianity gives us a framework within which we can actually make sense of that. And again, it's very important here to know that not all worldviews will actually grant us that. Christianity, even in that, there's a distinguishing factor, that Christianity helps us make sense of this type of evil we see now in our world. So evil is not only real and wrong, Christianity helps us make sense of those two things, but Christianity also says that God is not aloof or distant. He's actually come to us. And he's come to us primarily not through giving us instructions or a how-to guide. He's come to us primarily through revealing us his Son. He reveals to us his Son in the person of Jesus Christ. So Christianity's answer to us is not actually primarily theoretical, although there are answers that come to us at a theoretical level. No, the answer comes to us primarily when it comes to suffering, when it comes to evil. The answer comes to us in the form of a person, Jesus Christ, God in flesh, as the scriptures tell us, the image of the invisible God. If we want to understand what God is like, effectively says Paul, the Apostle Paul, who wrote many letters, and many of his books are made up in the New Testament. They're comprised in the New Testament. He tells us if we want to understand who God is like, look to Jesus. He uses those words. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So when we look to Jesus, we see that in the stories of those biographies of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these stories of Jesus Christ, we see compassion, we see love, we see grace, we see truth embodied in Jesus Christ. But we also see, when it comes to this kind of thing, evil, death, illness, Jesus knows those things. He witnesses death. We see that even in the book of John, one of Jesus' closest friends, Lazarus, we see Jesus lamenting and experiencing loss. He weeps at the sight of his friend's death. He doesn't automatically give a correction. He weeps with friends. Now, in seeing Jesus, then only in a matter of moments after that, he raises Lazarus from the dead. But then also he goes to the cross. And there's so much mystery in the cross, and mystery in the sense of it's very difficult to understand. It's very difficult, but we do know this. In God sending his Son Jesus to the cross, Jesus Christ takes on the enormity of sin, this massive power, this destructive power of sin, and actually defeats it at the cross, rises again. So what we know now through the life of Jesus, Christianity gives us a lens through which we can understand the reality of evil, the wrongness of it, but also that he comes into this world and gets involved in our pain and evil. And by him going to the cross, resurrection, I think of the words of one of our senior colleagues, Stuart McAllister, who says, we know that now the world that is not the world that will be. Yes, there is this wrongness. We sense it around us. We know it to be true, but it's not the end. The world that is not the world that will be. There's a verse. Let me just land on this point. There's a verse that many people have cited throughout this time. That's quoted out of 1 John 4:18 that says, "Perfect love casts out fear." And I think that pinpoints a question that we're asking ourselves right now in this moment: is where is the redemption in all this? Will this be redeemed? Is there a possibility for restoration in all of this? And what's interesting about that verse written by John the Apostle, he's saying that perfect love casts out fear, but the love that he's speaking of is actually rooted in a relationship to this living God made known to us in the person of Jesus Christ. It's not just a love that sort of is given to us sort of like in the shape of a gift, just sort of landing on our doorstep. No, it's a gift that is something we engage with, something we engage in that actually we have to accept. We have a choice. But once we accept that invitation of this love from Jesus, this relational understanding, this relational reality, that love that now fills us, he fills us with his presence, that is the love that has the power to cast out fear. So in a massive way, it's not just theoretical, like we want this love and it's at an ideas level. No, it's a relational level. When we invite Jesus into our lives to rule, that love that he puts into us has the power to cast out fear. That, in that sense, that is how this moment can be redeemed. Not necessarily by God taking us out of the moment, but by God giving us his love to endure, withstand, and have wisdom and courage for the moment. Knowing that, yes, in the end, the world that is right now is not the world that will be. Through the cross and the resurrection of Jesus, we know that he will make all things new in the end. But now, in this moment, he gives us his love that casts out fear so that we don't have to live in fear. But he gives us the power to live in that love, wisdom, courage, and grace.
Nathan, thank you so much. You gave us so much to think about. I really, really appreciate how you said that. This tough question isn't just a question for Christianity, but it's a question from any worldview. It's a question to any faith or no faith. I really struggled when I was an undergrad in history and philosophy with this question. And I kind of flirted with atheism, and it was a quote by Richard Dawkins that is pretty famous. It's from his 1996 book, River Road of Eden, where he says something to the effect of, from an atheist perspective, which he has, and he says from his perspective, the universe at bottom has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no good, no evil, no morality, just blind, pitiless indifference. And that from that atheist perspective, that materialistic perspective, all we have is matter, that there is no God, that all of a sudden that human suffering is not something that's inherently heartbreaking. It's only subjectively heartbreaking, but there's no real worth to human being. There's no real morality or goodness or evil. And when I got to see the kind of the stark reality of the failure of atheism to make sense for why at times like this, where the world is in a place of grieving for those of us who've lost loved ones, grieving for those who are sick, and grieving for those who have lost their jobs because of the economic implications and all this kind of stuff. I think our hearts cry out for this to actually matter, to cry out to say that this is wrong, this isn't how things should be, that the vulnerable and the elderly getting sick and being, serious implications from that we're not okay with that there's something inherently meaningful about human life and something inherently beautiful, something to celebrate when people are able to overcome it and get better. And so I love how you showed how it's actually in the scars of Jesus that we see maybe not a full answer to the question of why they're suffering, but at least the comfort of where's God in our suffering, that he is not indifferent, he's not blind or pitiless or different to our suffering, but that he actually holds our lives with nailed, scarred hands. And so I just love the way you're able to put that. I know you and I would love to do a whole event just on that, and we're actually going to kind of have that opportunity, not maybe you and me, but people who've actually taken the time to publish full books on this. So as we transition now to taking questions from around the globe, I need to let you know of a really meaningful event. The event itself, it's another Facebook Live, and it's called If God, Why the Coronavirus? And it's going to be 3 of the most senior speakers on our global team. We have about 100 speakers around the world, and these 3 are going to be speaking there. It's going to be the award-winning lawyer and author, Abdu Murray, and then also professors. They have their PhDs, they've written books, Joe Vitale and Vince Vitale. And Vince has actually written a book, Why Suffering? And so these are people who've spent a lot of time wrestling with these questions. And so this is an opportunity explore that question at a much deeper level, as well as whatever questions people put in. So that's going to be from the Zacharias Institute this Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we're going to include the link down below, and so please join me there. I'm going to be there learning online along with whoever else tunes in, being able to ask my tough questions and see what these really thoughtful speakers and authors are going to be able to help us as we work through these questions. So Nathan, thank you for tackling that really tough question, and look forward to going even deeper with your colleagues this Friday. So everyone tune in there. We have a question here from Jane from Toronto. She asked a question I think a lot of people can relate to. She says, how can I encourage my student kids? They are going stir crazy, missing their friends. They feel like their life has been suddenly cut off and going stir crazy. I noticed she's used the word stir crazy twice. I can only feel for her. And so Nathan, I know you have 4 children at home. Any advice for Jane from Toronto?
It's a great question. I think it's a question that many of us are asking right now. I think what I would say to that is the instructions of the scriptures tell us that actually in order to love well, because that I think is the question in that's being asked here, okay, how do I love, in this case, how do I love my kids well in a space where it seems, we don't have a framework. We're at sea without a compass. I think in order to love well, we need to understand well. And I think of just looking to my Bible here, in Philippians 1 verse 9, Paul writing to the church in Philippi. Philippi at the time was a Roman colony, and Paul's actually writing from prison, very unique setting. And he writes these words, and I think these are instructive, particularly to this question. He writes these words, and this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. Let me go back to verse 9. This is Philippians chapter 1, verse 9. And this is my prayer, writes Paul, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight. I have a very good friend, and she is a counselor, and I remember her saying to me, what does that mean to abound? And she said, look, it's to explode with love. Paul is saying, look, to abound with love means to effectively explode with love, but this love that becomes explosive, in the most positive sense of that word, comes through understanding, this knowledge. So what I would say is, I think a first step to understanding how we can love well in this situation is understanding. Now, the question then is, how do we understand well? How do we understand? I think understanding in this case comes to, for our kids, thinking, okay, where are they at? Now, it's a very contextualized question. Middle school, big difference in terms of how middle schoolers are, what they do in their spare time, to say students in high school. I think depending on where a person is asking, this could be also college level. Everyone right now, schools are shut down at every which level. So I think understanding the person can come by asking questions, and also knowing where is this person at? Where does this person spend their time? And somehow engaging with them at that level. But I think instead of going into trying to fix the situation, sometimes that is a tendency for us to fix the situation. Sometimes the greatest gift is to just be with them in the situation. And for many, it's a painful situation because it's just completely out of our normal rhythm. Be with that person, ask the questions, and engage with that person in that space. I would also say there's an opportunity here to call out again to God. Again, all these answers need to be contextualized, but saying, depending on where the person is, asking God for wisdom, asking Him for help in knowing how to navigate this time as it pertains to how we spend our time. Again, it can be at the college level, middle school, high school level. I know at an even more practical level, many people with students out of school, I know for here in Washington State, it's different regionally across the continent and across the world. But for many parents, if they have the opportunity, they have engaged with their friends from church to see how are they engaging with their kids. For some, I know they've started just temporarily some type of structure within which there's homeschooling. That's not necessarily say it is an answer, but that's a model. That is one template that can be used here in terms of when we're looking at that in terms of, okay, how do we spend time since school is going to be lost for like 1 month plus. But I think the starting point to this is figuring out, okay, how can I love well? And loving well starts actually with understanding well, understanding God, understanding the situation, understanding our kids, our neighbors. And one of the ways in which we can understand well is by asking questions, asking good questions. And this also includes asking questions of the Lord. God, how should we be spending our time? How can I parent right now? I think for some who might be listening, they might be saying, well, that's a very Christian perspective. That's not how I think. And there's a full disclosure, this is a Christian perspective. But this also points to the beauty of the Christian faith, that actually we're not alone. That it also points to the fact that we're dependent. If ever there were a situation that puts a magnifying glass on the fact that we are not just independent beings, this is it. We are dependent. The question is, who are we dependent upon? And I would say in this case, it's a beautiful opportunity, a very challenging opportunity, but it is still an opportunity to say, God, please help.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. I can only imagine for certain families where there's so much busyness. We haven't had meals together in so long because you got to take your children to soccer and be able to take children to piano and ballet and all the different extracurriculars, and all of a sudden all of that overnight canceled. And so now families are just, kind of in some cases in close proximity, and it's been a while since you've had a chance to just be in the same place. And I just want to encourage everyone who's watching not to feel any shame or frustration, that it might be uncomfortable, especially when you're in a situation that feels like there's just rampant boredom and fear, free time. Of course, it's going to be tough. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling stir crazy, you are not alone. And so, Nathan, I so appreciate your insights and help right there. We have another question from Simon. He writes, what are some pitfalls to avoid with so much of our interactions moving online?
It's a great question. I think to your question, Simon, I think there are a couple things I would say. It's a very good question. It's very real. I mean, we all feel that right now. I would say one, I think it does go back to just what I was saying a few moments ago. I think online, I think it's still helpful to monitor how much time we were spending online, and just looking through, it might be helpful even to put down on paper, when I'm online, what am I doing? How am I spending my time? Is it just sort of mindless, or just going through the news feed? Is it just sort of clicking on one YouTube video to the next YouTube video? Am I just sort of binge watching? Is that how I spend my time? And thinking, okay, how is what I'm doing meaningful? How is it life-giving? Asking those questions. I think of a book that Andy Crouch wrote called The Tech-Wise Family. Especially in this world right now, when, as you mentioned, Simon, so much of our lives are spent online, we have to ask questions that not only are technology, but the interface with what it means for us to be human. And one of the questions that Andy Crouch asks in that book is what I'm doing when it comes to my smartphone, when it comes to my device, not only gadgets, but also the computer, wearable devices, what I'm doing, is that thing building wisdom and courage? Because those are the things, when we think of virtues, when we think of proverbs, those are the things we're after. We want to become people who are wise, courageous. If the time that we're spending online, how are those things developing, cultivating, building wisdom and courage? I think I would also suggest, I think it's not only there was one other point I was thinking there.
No problem.
I lost the idea there, but I think that's the start that I put to that question.
We got a whole bunch more questions have come in just toward the end, and so I think that this might have to be the last question, which I know is just so painful because so many questions have just come in. But one that a number of people have asked is questions about small gatherings. So I'll ask the question from Eric, who's asking us all the way from the Philippines. So Eric, we're so glad you're tuning in all the way from the Philippines. He asks, would you recommend canceling small gatherings for Bible studies? We're in a small house church here in the Philippines. It consists of 4 families with an average of 25 attendees. Nathan, what do you think?
Yes, I mean, it's a great question. I would also, I think, I was just talking to a pastor, a very good friend of mine in California, and he was saying that this last Sunday, he had his church service, and his church is, I think, a few hundred. And what he did on that Sunday is he limited it to 50. Now, at that point, at that time, that was still, in terms of the standards and all the legal ramifications, what was encouraged by the state, that was encouraged. That was still okay. Now we know, even in America, that we know that it's encouraged to not have any more than 10 people in a small group. What I would say to this question, Eric, is first, thank you. It's a very good question. For my friend in California who's a pastor, he actually said, look, this is actually really difficult. He said, Nathan, do you know how hard it is to have, 50 people come, and basically say, sorry, if the rest of you we can't have, you'll have to, but you can come online and we have the service streamed that way. But then he said, think about this. Then 50 people come into the room, and then you have to have the social distancing of 6 feet. He's like, do you know how hard it is for just the common things you have when people come to church and have everyone situated 6 feet apart? He just said, look, it's very impractical. But we both thought that, given what we know, again, of the social distancing, how this disease spreads, the loving thing to do right now, the most loving thing to do could be to actually say, we can't meet as a group, but how do we still make use of technology so we can still somehow express love and care in embodied ways. So I think there are different platforms through which we can do this. There are different technological platforms. It could be through platforms such as Skype, through FaceTime, through Zoom. There are different technological ways in which we can do this. But I would actually say, one, looking at the data as we speak on this day, March 17th, we know that actually it's important to discourage group settings, knowing how the virus spreads. I think there's also an important footnote, an important caveat there. It's important to remember that this is not the end, but this actually might stir up a greater love and affection for the church in actually having this temporary absence. I just read an article in the New York Times, and it's titled "A Christian Response to Coronavirus." If you looked up that, I might be able to respond and put it on the Facebook feed after. But the title of this article is "The Christian Response to Coronavirus," and one major point in that article is he's saying actually the Christian response might be right now staying away. Yeah, so that actually Nathan. Love is enabling that person to stay healthy and stay well. But knowing that that's not the end, but that absence will actually cultivate and actually make it so that when we come back together, there will be a greater love and affection for the church, for the body, and for serving him together.
Nathan, thank you so much. Yeah, I love that perspective you bring. I think that's so helpful. We're going to have to wrap it up in a minute, but that's so helpful that like our best intentions don't actually factor into how we best love people. And so again, I'm an extrovert, and so my wife and I were chatting over the weekend about as everything's getting canceled, and I just want to go and give everybody a big hug and tell them that they're loved and that they matter. And we're just like, hey, that's not actually the loving thing, no matter how sweet our intentions are. And so I really appreciate it. I hear in your words a challenge to make sure that the decisions that we're making aren't just trying to be quick fixes or an instant fix to something. I think we live in such a fast food culture that we can forget that sometimes the solution and the response that is loving is actually one that is patient and that takes time. And so that being able to show love for especially the elderly, but really everybody, by social distancing right now, taking seriously the health warnings from the government officials and those medical experts, and being able to say, you know what, even if I can't see you today, maybe that will cultivate an even greater longing for my community. And we're hopeful that we will get through this and that we will meet together one day. and it will be really, really special. So we're so grateful. Nathan, thank you so much for taking your time, both first to write that article, which I know has spurred other thinking and discussions on this, even among me and my friends, let alone I know other people around the world. And then thank you also even more for taking time out of your day. I think it's still a day where you are in Seattle, for taking time out of your day to be here with us. And thank you everyone who tuned in. I know that RZIM Canada and RZIM Global, we're looking at ways that as things are being canceled, that we're able to actually still provide content, still provide a way to engage with people and be able to wrestle through questions both about COVID-19, but also other life questions. I know we're still all working through questions of love and relationship and fear and career and even the economic implications and all the questions that we face in the day-to-day life, whether we're facing a pandemic or not. And so please like the RZIM Canada page, like the RZIM page. Don't forget this Friday, 7 p.m., join me as I'll be in the audience globally, digitally for the event, If God, Why Coronavirus? And that again is with Abdu Murray, Joe, and Vince Vitelli. It's going to be such a good event. One more Facebook Live I need to tell you about. I literally need to, because Jane is messaging me, tell everyone about this. It's next Wednesday at lunchtime. It's going to be a Facebook Live. It's part of our series that we're doing, this Easter series every 2 weeks. We were hosting it in our office at RZIM Canada, and it was amazing. Last week was the first one, and the place was packed out with people. And now as we go digitally, because we have to cancel those types of gatherings, as we go digitally, we expect even more, and we'd love to see you there. I'm going to be the speaker this next Wednesday, and it's going to be Hungry for Hope. So that is whatever the date that next Wednesday is. I believe it's the 25th of March. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but it's next Wednesday, and it's going to be called Hungry for Hope. I'm going to be looking at the global practice of fasting. You'll see religions all around the world fast, and we're going to be looking at what uniquely Jesus offers us when it comes to Jesus' perspective on fasting and why people give stuff up for Lent and all that kind of stuff. I hope that whatever background you're from, it will be helpful to you. Also, one more announcement before you go, please stay. I know that this is a really personal subject matter. Some of us, I know some of you tuning in, have family members, even yourselves, are actually sick right now with COVID-19. And so we want you to know that we are praying for you. And we would love to receive your individual personal prayer requests. If anything that was talked about tonight, if even the conversation about God in the midst of our suffering, if you yourself on this or anything else, maybe you're wrestling through doubts, wrestling through questions, or maybe you're someone who is not a person of faith and you're doubting your doubts and you're beginning to wonder, maybe there really is more to life. Wherever you're at, we would love to get to pray with you. We'd love to get to wrestle through these questions with you. And so please email our team at prayer@rzim.ca. That's prayer@rzim.ca. We're even going to be taking your prayer requests tonight. I know a few of us are going to be staying up late, ready to chat with anybody personally. So please take, if you want prayer or you just need to discuss some stuff, please email us at prayer@rzim.ca. On that note, Nathan, thank you again for being with us. And I'd like to ask you to close in prayer for all of us globally.
Okay. Father, we do not know. We do not know so much, but you know. You know why. So in this moment, we ask for help. Help us in this time of great need. Help us to see. Help us to see. Help us to hear. Help us to understand. Help us to love. Give us grace. Give us wisdom. Give us peace. Heal this world from sickness. Shine your light upon this darkness. To the hungry, bring sustenance. Bring correction to corruption. Bring aid to those stricken with illness. Give strength to medical practitioners. Empower our leaders with knowledge, wisdom, and courage. Father, we are weak, but you are strong. We are dependent on you. We need you. We acknowledge you as the God of comfort and of hope. Fill us now with your presence. We ask, we pray these things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Nathan, again, thank you so much, and thank you everyone who tuned in globally. Have a good night.